Congratulations, you are to the last part of your stamp sheet. It's time to start drafting your essay, and you're going to do that on your individual Padlet. Okay, so the things that you need to have out, you need to have your individual Padlet ready to go. Here's mine. I'm going to zoom in on just this one piece of evidence to show you how to do this process, but you're going to do this with each piece of evidence you've chosen to keep. I'm going to make mine big. So I'm going to show you how I would work with this single piece of evidence. You're going to do this process several times. So you need your Padlet out. You also should have your stamp sheet out. You've done all of these steps already. You've already gotten stamped off for steps 1 through 5. You are now on step 6. The other things that you should have out on your desk. You should have a control tactics writing supports document. This gives you some sentence starters to do your say, mean, matter, as well as eventually to transition between paragraphs and write your conclusion. But this will be the area that you're working in today. You should also have out on your desk this yellow paper from English class, where you have examples of how to write general and specific context. And you also should have on your desk your practice where you did say and mean practice and got feedback from me. And I told you how you were doing and gave you some specific feedback on what you could do better. That's the stuff that should get you rolling on this task. Okay, so our goal now is to write for our each piece of evidence. You need to write a say or context, a say, and a mean, and a matter. Okay, and we're going to do those on the individual Padlets on your where you've been gathering your evidence. So first, let's clean this up. I'm going to edit this. This is no longer Eden and Elsa's. This is now mine. Okay, I'm going to write myself a reminder that I need to do a CECA. And so the source is my citation. I can go ahead and format that now. Nothing to Envy is by Barbara Demick. And then my citation should just look like Demick 194. Okay, and I'm going to move that source down to the end of my quote right now. Down here. Okay, so now I've done my evidence and I have my citation. I can get rid of this. I'm going to need to write some context. Then I've got my quote. Then I need to also write my analysis afterwards. So those are the things that I'm going to build out. I'm going to start with writing my context. And remember that I need both general and specific context. We saw this in this lesson. General context is going to give me the big picture. What am I talking about? Here I'm talking about North Korea, and you have an example of this written on your document already. You could totally reuse this or write your own. And then you need to brainstorm specific context about this particular quote. Okay, let's go back to the Padlet. The first thing I've done is to write 2 sentences of general context about North Korea. And you need to do this the first time you introduce evidence from some context, from 1984, from North Korea, from Stalin. You need a sentence or 2 of general context. If you have multiple pieces of context from the same area, from the same topic, you don't have to write this general context every time. But this is my first example from North Korea, so I'm going to write it. This is what it sounds like. North Korea is a current dictatorship that has been ruled by 3 generations of highly oppressive leaders since the 1950s. In North Korea, all media is censored. Television sets are modified so that citizens can only watch state-sponsored content, which gives them a very limited and biased perspective on their own country. There's my general context. Remember now, the next thing I have to do is to write specific context. What is happening at this specific quote? What do I need to know to understand this specific quote? And I'm going to start mine as bullet points, just the way we practiced in class. Back to my Padlet. Specific context. Okay, here's the quote that I'm working with. Listening to South Korean television was like looking in the mirror for the first time in your life and realizing you were unattractive. North Koreans were always told theirs was the proudest country in the world, but the rest of the world considered it a pathetic, bankrupt regime. Jun-sung knew people were starving. He knew that people were dragged off to labor camps, but he had never before heard these figures. Surely South Korean news reports were exaggerated, just like North Korean propaganda. Okay, the things that I think I need to know to understand this quote, I need to know that Jun-sung is a university student who's grown up in North Korea. I need to know that he's illegally listening to South Korean news broadcasts. I need to know that he's hearing South Korean people on the news talk about this United Nations conference, and they discuss how messed up North Korea is. One thing I need to unpack is he'd never before heard these figures. I should probably add that. I'll say that the figures about the number of people starving or in gulags. Okay, so now I've brainstormed my context. I can delete this. That was what the group who found this quote gave me, but now I'm going to write my own. So I'm going to delete that, and now I'm going to build out my bullet points into sentences. Okay, let's see where I am. So I've written my general context. Now I've written my specific context. It says, Jun Sung is a North Korean university student. Here, he is illegally listening to a South Korean news broadcast by poking a button through a label placed by the state regulators, a huge risk if he is caught. He hears South Korea talk about a United Nations conference giving statistics about the number of people starving or in gulags in North Korea, and they are so much worse than he would have guessed. Okay, the last thing I need to do with my context is to do my quote lead-in. If you recall, I need to lead into my quote. It's a half sentence that flows into my quote. Blank describes blank as, when, before, after. Okay, let me choose one of those and go back to my Padlet. I'm going to try as. So I'm going to say, as Jun Sung listens, he reflects. And now I'm into my quote. So I can delete this. And I'm all set. So now I have my context, and I'm going to blend that all together. So I should have general context, which flows into specific context, which flows into my quote. And now I've finished the context section of my CECA. This is what it looks like so far. So now I need to add, I've got my C, context. I've got my E, the quote. I've got my citation right here, Demic 194. My next job is to write analysis, and my analysis is a say, mean, matter. Remember that we know how to do say, mean, matter from this exercise that we did in English class, and we also used this last year. In my say, I need to explain exactly what on the surface the evidence is saying as simply as I can. Then I need to do an interpretation. What does this mean? And then finally, I need to do a matter. How does this build my argument in my paper overall? Okay, here I go. I'm going to do a say first. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and type my say first. And I'm going to write say so that I remember what I need to do. I need a say, I need a mean, and I need a matter. Eventually, I'm going to combine these together into a single paragraph, but this is going to help me stay organized. Remember that my say is just paraphrasing my quote the simplest way I can. So I'm going to say, in other words, Jun Sung had a hard time recognizing the North Korea he had heard about his whole life with these shocking statistics about the suffering in his country. That doesn't sound quite right. I'm going to say he had a hard time reconciling the North Korea he had heard about his whole life with these shocking statistics about the suffering in his country. That's my say. Now I'm going to do my mean. Recall that mean needs to do interpretation. It needs to pick up on a piece of the quote and build an inference from it. So I'm going to go back to my quote, and I'm going to choose a section that I think that I can say something more about. Again, my overall argument that I'm trying to make is that constant propaganda over time and repetition builds up into the outcome of indoctrination. That's my argument in this paper. This whole quote is interesting, but the part that interests me the most is this last part, where it's not that he doesn't have any idea about what's going on. He just has no idea about how bad it is, and that's the way the propaganda starts to slant his understanding of the world. So that's the part I want to focus on. The part I chose to zoom in on was this line right here. So I'm writing, the line, surely South Korean news reports were exaggerated, just like North Korean propaganda, underscores the way Jun Sung struggles to make sense of this new information. Demick states that Jun Sung was aware that conditions were hard for some in North Korea, but this moment where he confronts the statistics feels unbelievable to him. It is, in fact, bumping up against a lifetime of propaganda, and Demick compares this to, quote, looking in a mirror for the first time to help us understand the sense of disorientation, wonder, and shock Junsong felt, seeing that his country was not as strong as he thought, and also, perhaps, that he had been lied to for so long. You'll notice in my mean, I chose to zoom in on 2 parts. I did this, but then I realized I also needed this looking in a mirror for the first time. And I'm actually wondering now, having written it, this is my recursive process, maybe I don't need this first part after all. Maybe I could just start with this. I'm not sure. I'm going to leave it in so that I have it, but maybe I'll put it in italics so that I know that maybe I want to delete that later. That's my mean. Now I'm going to go on to my matter. I'll go ahead and delete this. This is my note from the evidence. I don't need that anymore. So my matter is, how does this connect to what I'm trying to write about? I'm going to save this and go back and look at my topic one more time. So here's my thesis over here. My thesis was propaganda leads to indoctrination, that is, an unquestioning belief in the government through time repetition and choking out other messages. So there's a lot that I think I can say about this quote, about how Junsong had an unquestioning belief in the government, that he was an adult who'd heard this his whole life, also that he had not heard any opposing viewpoints, and this first time that he hears an opposing viewpoint, it throws everything into doubt. So I'm going to find a way to say that in my matter. So back to my matter, down here I go. Okay, so again, my thesis was about what are the connections between propaganda and indoctrination, and how does propaganda build up into indoctrination over time. And what's really interesting to me in this quote is the way that Junsong, who's trying so hard to get new information and is taking on such risk to open his own eyes, still struggles to accept it, even though he's a pretty open-minded, well-educated person. So that's what I want to capture in my matter. I wrote, this moment shows the connection between propaganda and indoctrination. For someone like Junsong, who has grown up constantly hearing that North Korea is great and never hearing the staggering statistics about the suffering in the country, each small message stacks up into a whole belief system about the way the country works. This example shows how getting alternate information here from South Korean news can shake up that feeling of indoctrination, but that the change is not immediate. This quote shows how deeply rooted beliefs linger and cause citizens to doubt new information, even as they try to take steps to open their own minds. Okay, I now have a say and a mean and a matter. I'm going to combine those together into one paragraph of analysis, and then I think I'm done. You might not want to do this until you feel confident about your analysis. You're welcome to keep it labeled as say mean, but eventually you will combine your say and your mean and your matter into one long analysis section. And this flows right out of my quote. And now I have a whole body paragraph done. That's the process. You're going to repeat this process with each other piece of evidence that you're going to use in your paper.